Welcome back to Season 3 of Go to Masters podcast, where we converse with GTM leaders from some of the fastest growing businesses out there. We bring to you what they have learned through their experience and what they have seen so far. Joining us today is Sam Clark, Director of Revenue Operations at SolutionReach. Let's get to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. And as I was talking offline, it's awesome to meet a counterpart who's another director of RevOps who's leading the RevOps function in another organization such as ourselves. And it's always exciting to exchange notes, if not close in person, but even through a podcast, it's always exciting to exchange notes. To start off, could you give us a brief introduction about who you are, what you do, and how you ended up as director of RevOps at SolutionReach?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. So I'm Sam Clark. I'm the Director of Revenue Operations at SolutionReach. My career started actually in the support world, doing technical support. I actually started my career on the phone, resolving technical support issues with products. That took me up through management of CX leadership, in which I realized that really wasn't the career path for me. What I was most fascinated was how we did business, not necessarily the problems we were solving. And so I pivoted at that point into business intelligence, getting behind data, understanding reporting. But that naturally led me into process and how we create processes. And I had the opportunity to bounce between some great companies in that time to really learn a lot. I've been in RevOps now for basically 10 years, but I've been in the B2B SaaS world my entire career, which is about 15 years at this point. Also, I am an avid sailor and baker, which I think are important hobbies to collect alongside my professional career to drive motivation and mastery.
Awesome. So I think you have covered some of these pieces. And for one, I also empathize with the fact that you have gone around with different careers before you actually entered into the RevOps world, so to speak. To me, I think it builds empathy more than other things, because people who have seen numbers all their life, it's a little different with them versus someone who has seen few roles and then come and say they have empathy to the person on the other side who is actually selling or, building things on the other side, right? You are like, hey, I understand what you're doing, but and that's very powerful. So can you talk us through those, defining moments early in your career that shaped, the way you lead today, or the way you look at things today?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing you just said, actually, I think is really important. The ability to understand kind of the end user experience, not just being behind the data and the numbers to understand that, but to really understand what it's like to have, your hand on the keyboard and your butt in the chair to do the job, right? So I've had some pretty key defining moments in my career, and they were pretty important at each level of the organizations I've worked at every point. As an end user, I quickly became aware that at the business level, it's really hard as an end user to always know what the next best thing to do is, and how much work records don't reflect current reality. And having that disconnect to be so much of what I was actually doing day to day versus actually taking the right action. Some other important, as I realized when I began to manage a large technical support team with 100 plus individual contributors underneath me, how much the data that they used to do their work was different than the data that I was using to make decisions, and how they were both vitally important, but they were also tied together. And how the more I asked of my individual contributors to contribute to business data and spend process time in that, the more inefficient they became. As we asked them to gather more information on each interaction or that sort of thing, right? Like it slowed them down and we got less efficient, but it was always inefficiency to get data that the business needed. Right. Another critical takeaway that I learned was when I moved fully into business intelligence, the power of forecasting and big data, and how looking at data over 6 months to a year can do such a tremendously accurate job of understanding the performance of the next 6 months to a year, and how that data at that scale really is used to drive most of the main decisions that are made from the highest levels in the company. And then finally, I think the last key takeaway that I really learned that was probably the most critical in my RevOps career was how important it was to understand not only the data around success. So often that's the data that everyone wants to know most about, right? Like your success, your KPIs of success, whether that be revenue generated, pipeline created, however you want to measure that. We always want to know the success, and very rarely do we pay as close of attention to failure. And when I first took on a RevOps team entirely, being the sole leader and having very junior admins under me, I realized the power in understanding are failures and understanding what a leaky funnel is and how do you repair a leaky funnel by understanding your failure. Those were all pretty critical, important pieces for me to design how I go about RevOps. Really, I truly try to design a process and a program that becomes very easy and lightweight on the individual contributor, providing them the data they need to do their job accurately, and do as much data gathering through automation and key buyer milestones as what really drives business data decisions. And where possible, I try to not make them so linked to each other. I want the people to have the data they need to do their job, and the business have the data they need. And more often, what I find is that the key data that you need to do your job is actually generated by someone further up the line than you, right? And so understanding that data pass off from position to position became so critical. And so that's really how I focus my work now. Is like, sure, everyone's role at the data they create, and can we understand what that role is going to look like in 6 months? What are the expectations we're going to have in 6 months to a year? And what are the successes and failures going to look like? Because once we have all that data together, the company can make the very best decisions. Because there's really only one question I feel like I'm constantly answering as a revenue operations professional. And that is the spend that we're making returning the investment that we want to make? That's constantly the question, right? We're going to spend so much and we will hope to gain so much. And we have all these reasons why we believe spending this much will result in this much. And if it doesn't, we want to know why. And that's consistently the question. And I found that that question is really best answered by really understanding what are people doing? How is that money being spent in time, in decision making, in administrative work versus the core functionality of their job? And that's kind of like the most critical pieces that come together.
So I cannot help but wonder through your conversation that you're talking about a lot of things, right? And it's if you're intently listening, it's a lot of things to unpack as well. As you start with, the technical side of where you started with data to the position that you hold and how you view it now, where you talk about it's not like the data at the, front lines, but actually two levels above which start making sense to the front lines, right? It's very deep in its own weight. But what I would like to maybe ask as a follow-up question there is, where did it click for you personally? Like, hey, this is what is happening and this is what RevOps does. And so I need to be in RevOps. Like, that's a very, big journey by itself, right? Where did it click for you?
Yeah. So for me, the journey into RevOps was really on the instance of trying to make jobs easier. I recognize that like there was so much power certain individuals could have at making everyone's jobs easier. And I wanted that sort of role. That's the sort of thing I wanted to be doing. And then I found that if you can make everyone's job easier, including the jobs that generate revenue, then that has huge impact. And we were able to make huge impact at past companies I've worked for. We were able to make significant improvements in revenue and pipeline creation by understanding failure and seeing just that simple of like saying, hey, we now understand our failures better so we can spend our money not so much on the failures, but more on the winning paths. Like that had drastic effects on the ability of the company to generate revenue. And that was huge. That was just seeing that implementing simple, just the way we were recording our data. That was all we were doing. We didn't really massively change what any role was doing.
Correct.
We simply became much better at measuring what they were doing against the expectation we had against the actions they were taking. And once we could see that, it became very clear these actions don't have value. We don't get return on investment on them. And so we can remove them, or we can shortcut them, or we can route them into different paths that might get more value out of it than we were seeing previously. I'll give you an example of something that we saw. People no showing to a demo, right? That's a common concern where someone schedules a demo through your scheduling link and then for whatever reason they can't show, right? Someone no showing is usually a dead end for a lot of sales processes, and they don't have a lot of process to recover and salvage them. But we found that by just seeing that signal and watching someone disposition a demo as they didn't show up and having a concrete plan of action that we automated, causes to increase our salvage, right? And therefore increase our pipeline creation. And of course, pipeline creation results in more revenue. And so it was just that simple, understanding that like something that usually was a dead end for a funnel trip could actually still be rerouted if we just simply understood like ultimately why did they not show up and is there a plan of action we can take at this point.
Yep. And I've also had a lot of these, very obvious to me moments where, hey, this seems so obvious, but, it is not done. And you pick it up and then you actually deliver some value for sure. Since we are getting really tactical, right? Like you're talking
Mhm.
about very specific stuff. We are adopting AI internally as well. I was curious to know your own take on how you are using AI internally, and where it's actually having a good impact for you, where it's not having as much of an impact for you guys.
But AI is changing the game right now, and I think the way we're looking at AI from an individual contributor standpoint is usually very generative. It's very, how much of can AI do my job for me, whether that be through communicating or generating content, whatever it might be. I think this is looking at AI very shallowly. I think there's a much deeper
Yep.
look at how we can
Yep.
use AI that's way more critical. I think of AI as the most reliable individual to record information in a system because humans are terrible at creating data inherently, right? If we expect someone to create data based on a conversation, we're expecting them to remember everything that happened in the conversation, all the key data that we need out of it, right? Like we have all these expectations of a person to capture critical data from their memory, right? Report it into the system. And that's a task that AI inherently does much better. But the part of AI is so important is understanding that you have to give it context. And that's the real power of AI in revenue operations is using AI in the appropriate context of the task you're giving it. So I'll give you an example of how we use AI right now at SolutionReach, something that we've recently implemented. We implemented basically a note taker, an equivalent of a note taker. But this note taker that we installed or we implemented for everyone, it was really more of a sales coach. It was more of a way of turning the qualitative data of how did that meeting go with a prospect and turning that into coaching information so that we can basically be coaching all of our interactions automatically. But also the future of this product is that we will push the data around critical points back into our CRM for
CRM.
on behalf of the salesperson. And we know that already at this point, our executive reviews, our team meetings, everything has much more impact because all of a sudden everyone is being read in to an accurate situation. And you're no longer receiving a filter from a person doing their best to recall and recount important data. And so that's a very simple way, right? It's just a listener in the room that's able to parse the data using the context of the conversation and the context we give it around the things we expect to hear and happen in that conversation. And we can derive systematic results that we can use to make decisions, right? And that can go from anything as qualitative as like product reasons of why they want to continue with the sale versus not continue, like objections, down to the types of arguments that they make or the type of positioning they make on return on investment in our products. And that's critical, right? Because we can then see the successes and failures that come from those approaches, the human approach to how we interact. And we have no ability to do that without AI because we don't have the ability to review at scale all those calls. I originally approached from a QA, but then realizing that it could then become literally the interface between the human and the system, that changed it for me of where I see the purpose of AI. AI can interact with systems much more reliably than we could ever ask a human to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think aggregated information and specific information on calls are two different problem sets that we are also exploring. Like, for example, we have a call one, call two, call three. So call one would give you insight one. The effectiveness of this for AI and the CRM in essence to carry forward the insight from call one to two, three, and four and get an aggregate sense of what's happening is I think the key piece that we have trying to solve. Pretty much know what you actually laid out from notes and summaries of calls and stuff like that. But yeah, good stuff. I think we are also traveling on the same boat.
Yeah, I did have one more comment of AI, of where I see it being well used, especially with the rise of agentic AI and being able to set AI on a task. That is the next level in which AI is going to be pretty critical at handling tasks that are very menial, but reliably consistent in how they're performed. Agentic AI will remove so much of the minutia of tasks, in my opinion. And I think we're at the beginning of understanding that at this point.
Yep, yep. Super exciting times, I would say. In your eyes, how do you see RevOps differentiate itself from being a support function to be like a strategic function? Like, how have you seen the role evolve over the years?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And this is a partially a cultural question. I think partially companies can determine that their operations team need to be supported, that the vision truly lies in other roles. And to a degree, I don't necessarily disagree with that. What RevOps best does is giving feedback to the other roles about whether their vision objectives are being successful or not. And so that's where it becomes strategic. It's you have a marketing leader or a sales leader who has a vision of how to accomplish the job. We can measure to know if that vision works or not. And if it's not, we need to be stepping into the strategic conversations and discussing what aspects of that is not working. Is it the messaging? Is it the cadence and content? Is it the personnel? And being able to provide data around each of those pieces is critical in strategic conversations. So we should not be simply consultative at best. In those meetings where we're determining how things go, we need to be part of the decision-making path because we can see where things like AI or tooling can reduce the need for either personnel process change or even like reduction of needing personnel to be accomplishing certain tasks. And so that's where I think we can be more strategic because strategy really comes down to, once again, the main question: how do you spend your money the right way to get the most money out? And RevOps is literally telling you the answer of how you're spending it now and what's coming out of it. And so we can help you understand how to get the most out of it by simply understanding the vision of what you're trying to accomplish and the methods in which you're trying to accomplish it.
Yep, completely agree with that. And to lead on from here, where do you see the discipline of RevOps move forward? Like say 5 years or 10 years from now, how do you see the function look in the future? Do you think it would remain the same RevOps function? Would it get integrated? Would it get more specialized? Like, what are your thoughts?
I think RevOps is going to become a role that is going to require a lot of business acumen and less technical specialty. I think right now a lot of people come into RevOps because they gain certification or they gain some form of technical skill. And then on the job, we kind of expect them to gain business acumen to understand why we're doing the things we're doing. I think RevOps in the future to come in this role, the primary skill set that will be valued will be people who understand what the business is doing and why it's doing it. And so that business acumen will be actually the valuable skill because talking about AI is going to take over everyone's interaction with the computer, right? And your ability to interact with that AI and correctly give it instruction and review its output for quality is going to be a vastly more important skill than the ability to do the thing the AI is doing. And so I think as leaders, as we're looking at this, we want to look at taking our current personnel that we have and upskilling them towards this future. Saying, hey, we're going to get to this point. How do we make sure that we're best set up to handle it when it gets to that point? And how can I ensure that the people who are working on my team, my analysts, my admins, all the people who work in revenue operations, that they're doing more than just completing a task, but understanding the context in which that task is. Because as they develop that broader view and understanding, they can use AI tooling to accomplish more, to affect more at once. So it means that teams don't need to grow at scale to provide high level analysis or process change for large organizations. A very skilled revenue operations team that's very lean could manage very large organizations simply because they're employing agentic AI to accomplish the changes that need to be made that fit the business needs that the human has to interpret by being in those meetings. And so I think that's what's going to change the most in revenue operations in the next 5 years. It will become a different skill set to work in this career than it has looked previously. I know a lot of people in revenue operations probably started their careers as a Salesforce admin, right? And like, that's awesome. And those skills are so critical because understanding that data model helps you understand how that applies to business. Yeah. So that's the piece that's going to stay. What's going to go away is the piece of, do you know how to change a flow to create a task here, right? Like that's the part, the declarative programming, that's the part that's going to probably go away with the increased intelligence and capability of AI.
Yeah. I think my own take on this would be like the jack of all trades would actually become more powerful than the master of one, right? You have a bit
Absolutely.
of knowledge or understanding of a bunch of things. And like you have, right, the experience of working in the trenches, right? It brings a muscle that is not there in others who probably have not had this experience, and it subconsciously helps you figure things out and then rest anyway. Like you said, AI takes care of the actual execution itself. So I
Absolutely. And
kind
I
of
think
resonate with what you just said.
Absolutely. And I think the best thing we can do as revenue operations leaders is to continue to immerse ourselves in the different functions of of the companies we work for. Understand what everyone is doing, why they're doing it. That will going to the front lines will increase the leadership's capability of it impacting more with less. But as long as we remain siloed to the way we came into it, for example, I came through support. I know a lot about support, how to run a good support press, but ultimately I had to learn about marketing. Understand how does marketing work? How's marketing work in a B2B business? How does that affect the sales motion of a B2B SaaS company? Right. And then I had to dive into all the positions of sales. I had to understand them. It couldn't just be something that happened somewhere else. And so, but the more I learned, the more I became capable. And so that would be what I would say for any leader is if there's an aspect of your business in which you feel you don't truly understand the principles that guide the decisions and the process and the work, then you need to spend time now at learning that so that way you can affect change in a meaningful way when your capability to make that change broadens.
Yep. Yep. It's been pleasure talking to you, Sam. Do you have any closing comments for some of our younger listeners or people who are starting off at RevOps from other roles? Uh, if you want to talk about two things or maybe one
Yeah.
thing that you would want to pass on, what would that be?
Sure, absolutely. And I want to reiterate that I guess as one of the things is know your business. It's not enough to know the tech stack. It's not enough to know the integrations. You need to know what the people are doing at your business and what is directly affecting in the data that's being looked at by the executive staff, right? Understanding everyone's role in the funnel, for example, will help them understand how the spend towards accomplishing that piece of the funnel is best spent.
Uh-huh.
So I'd say that's number one is you need to understand your business. If there's an aspect that you feel like you don't understand, spend the time, boots on the ground, pretend like you're in that role for a week if you need to, whatever it is, learn every aspect of your business. And step number two on that, I'd say is if you want to get into it, if you're coming into your professional career now and revenue operations seems like a great task, the best thing you can do is master what you're doing right now. Understand exactly what you're doing and how it affects all the other organizations at your company, because you are then beginning to build the business acumen that I spoke of to be able to then take a higher level vision of what's going on and make impactful changes. So mastery where you're at now will always benefit you if revenue operations is your end goal. Just understand that that's not where you're going to stay. It's going to be the first piece that you're going to gather in your career to help you have the tool set that will make you a compelling and impactful revenue operations leader.
Awesome. Extraordinary insights. I couldn't have put it better myself. Well, that brings us to the end of this insightful episode of Go To Masters. Big thanks to Sam for sharing his experience and valuable insights. Remember, you can tune in to us every week to learn more from game changers driving hyper-growth companies across the globe. Go To Masters is brought to you by Everstage, your trusted partner for transforming the way businesses handle sales compensation. I'm your host, Venkat, signing off.